This is What Do You Bring to the Table, a series made by youth for youth that aims to explore the many, many career paths available within our Canadian food systems. By interviewing industry leaders across the country, we get a first-hand look at the various career opportunities available to the next generation, with a particular focus on equity and sustainability. We want to thank the Gay Lea Foundation and the Ontario Trillium Foundation for their generosity in supporting this project. Please visit our website www.seeds.ca/schoolfoodgardens and sign up for our free monthly e-newsletter to stay involved. You can also find us on Instagram, Facebook, Twitter, YouTube, and TikTok. Links to those are on our website. If you like what we are doing, please drop a like, review, or comment. Or if you have the means to, contribute with a monetary donation through our website. Thanks for listening. This is episode 2, Noah and Kurtis.
So this is the Seeds of Diversity interview with Kurtis Pilkington. First question, who are you and what are you studying?
Sure. So, my name's Kurtis Pilkington. As Noah just said, I am currently doing my master's in plant agriculture at the University of Guelph. And previously, I did my undergrad in honors agriculture at Guelph. I'm not really from an ag background per se myself. My extended family farms, and so growing up, I was kind of surrounded by agriculture and farming that way. But coming out of high school, I knew that ag was something that I was interested in, and just figured, I might as well go to Guelph and pursue it further and see what could come out of it.
So you're inspired by agriculture. What do you want to do for a career?
So I think coming out of university, and the main reason why I decided to do a master's is I'm really interested in the research side of agriculture. So when I was in my final year of my undergrad, I had the opportunity to do a year-long research project looking at drought tolerance in soybean varieties. And that, in combination with some summer jobs that I had working in ag research, kind of kicked off my interest. And so if you want to do research work, the only way to really get into it is to do a master's.
Mm-hmm.
So my ideal end goal, I guess, would be to work as a research biologist for one of the larger ag companies.
Are you going to get a doctorate, or are you just going to go with your master's?
I think I'm just going to stick with my master's for now. Another 4 years of school seems like a lot at this point, but I'd be open to it in the future for sure if the right opportunity came around and it was the right project.
So just to start off more general, what is it like studying agriculture? Some people may not know anything about agriculture or farming. So what generally are you looking at? And in addition to that, what's one of the main things you're researching? What's the industry most interested in?
Okay. I'll tackle the first part first. What's it like to study agriculture? So it may surprise a lot of people that aren't really from an ag background how many people come into specifically the University of Guelph to study agriculture that really have no prior experience in ag at all. They might be inspired by issues that they see in food systems, or they might just be interested in producing food or learning about how it works. Or maybe they have a distant connection with agriculture and they decide to kind of pursue it, sort of like my experience. Once you get in there, if you're doing an undergrad in agriculture, it starts out really diverse. So you're learning from the ground up all different parts of what agriculture really means. And it's a massive industry, right? You have things like your typical, what you think of crops growing in a field, and cows being milked in a barn or something like that. But then you also have agroforestry where we're producing trees to be used in pulp and paper. We have all the greenhouse production that goes on. You have small scale farming, organic, CSA, all the new research going into aquaponics and hydroponics and growing in vertical tiered systems. So agriculture really covers anything that's producing food products or any other products that we're going to be using at some point. And we kind of study all of that. If I could really say like one thing about studying ag at Guelph is I think it has, like, this program has one of the best student communities out of any program that I've really seen or heard of or experienced.
Can I stop you for a sec? Sorry.
Yeah, for sure.
How many students are in the program? Like, do you have, if you know?
Yeah, so the OAC, that's the Ontario Agricultural College.
Yeah.
That's one of the core colleges at Guelph. I would say each year there's probably somewhere like 2,000 to 3,000 students plus that would fall under that college, specifically studying things like agriculture science or business or like specific agriculture programs. There's probably somewhere around 600 or 700 students each year that start. So it's pretty big. And generally all of those students like end up becoming really well involved in the program and student life, and as well as their academics.
That sounds awesome.
Yeah, it's a pretty great community. Like I really loved my time there. Well, I'm still here.
So I would say as agriculture, like outside of school, just as an industry, like part of what Seeds of Diversity is about is like fair practices and like when it comes to growing food and produce. Like from your knowledge of the modern industry, what's the biggest problem with like food production, and like what's the biggest thing that should be stopped, if any?
It's kind of tough to narrow it down to one thing. What do you mean by fair practices when you're using fair practices as?
Like I would say something that is looked upon in like a moral or ethical standard. Would you say, or like for example, I did a bit of research online and I found stuff about pesticides and how pesticides can leak, and if they're ingested, it can actually be fatal. So I mean, practices like that where it's something the industry does, but there's a bit like a side effect that's like if I were to make an analogy, like with the energy industry, obviously like pollution and greenhouse gas effects. So when it comes to like produce and agriculture, what is the like biggest like bane of the industry?
Yeah. So there's definitely issues with a lot of aspects of agriculture, but it kind of comes as a bit of a trade-off in terms of we would likely be unable to produce enough food cost effectively without using some of what may be considered more like ethically ambiguous practices. And a lot of those have you have to do a really well thought out cost benefit analysis when you're looking at a lot of these aspects like pesticides or like synthetic fertilizers, and really consider what the alternatives are and how well they would work as well. But like two things that I could point to that are issues that are definitely being explored and combated within the industry, or trying to look at solutions for. One would be overuse of fertilizers and fertilizer leaching. This was especially a bigger issue in the past, and environmental regulations have improved this somewhat. But when you have excess fertilizer going down on soil that won't be able to hold on to it, whether it's being applied at the wrong time or there's weather conditions that affect it, that can leach out of the soil and into river systems and lakes and cause things like algal blooms and produce toxic conditions. So that's one thing that needs to be considered whenever like producers are using a resource like fertilizers. The same thing with pesticides, as well as how we manage them is really important, because they do an important job for us, but if we use them the wrong way, we can have like toxic effects to humans, which is why there's safety standards in place, but it's important to follow them. There's also an issue looking on the pesticide front. You may have heard of the term herbicide resistance or pesticide resistance.
Mm-hmm.
So we talk about that a lot with a product like Roundup. So glyphosate or Roundup is this really, really effective weed killer that's really, really safe compared to a lot of other pesticides, like for generally anything that's not a plant that you're trying to target. But what happened when that was released is everyone just stopped using other products and only used Roundup. And what that meant is that we developed these super weeds that are now resistant to Roundup. Roundup doesn't kill them anymore. And they're really hard to control. And so whenever we're using pesticide products, we need to make sure that we're using them effectively for human health and environmental health, and then just overall management of the system in general, so we don't create problems for ourselves in the future.
Do you think the authorities do a good job of regulating stuff like that, or do you think it's a little too lax in Ontario?
Ontario's actually pretty strict with a lot of stuff. Like, we have pretty stringent environmental regulations compared to like some places in the state. Issues is we'll have new research coming out looking at how to combat issues as they arise, or looking at what future problems might be. And there can sometimes be like a lag time in terms of getting that knowledge into practice where it can actually make a difference. And then also whether you're doing that through policy and legislation, or whether you're doing it through like other methods to try to educate farmers and producers. I'm sure a lot of people would say that we don't have enough regulation and policy in Ontario, but I think if you're going to ask any of like the farmers and producers, they would say the opposite, because sometimes extra rules can really hamstring you and make it really difficult to do an effective job of what they're out there to do, which is produce food. Right. So it's a fine balance. You kind of need to have the minimum in place that's set in stone and kind of push that forward, but really it needs to be like farmer led in terms of they're the ones taking initiative and putting these best practices into place. If it's not really led by the farmers and producers, then you're going to have a really hard time getting it actually done and in practice.
All right. So kind of shifting now, I went on to the OAC website and I saw some of the projects that are going on from students. Would you like to touch upon some of those, like anything that personally interests you?
Sure. I can talk a little bit about what my project is, and then I'll maybe say like a couple quick things about some other ones that you might find interesting. So my project in specific is working with wheat. The idea being that we're trying to improve wheat production in Ontario. So wheat is like a small cereal that's really beneficial when it's grown. It's fantastic for improving your soil health. It builds soil organic matter, which you can think of soil organic matter as like the sponge in soil. That's what soaks up water, soaks up nutrients, and creates this like awesome environment for plants to grow as well as microorganisms. So wheat's good for building that environment. And so in order to get more producers to grow wheat and include it in the rotations, we have to make sure it's as productive as possible and actually can make some money. So my project looks at combining different fertilizer rates with a chemical product, which they're known as plant growth regulators. And essentially what they do is you could think of them like an anti-steroid. So like a steroid makes like you grow bigger, stronger, faster. What the plant growth regulator does is when you apply it at the right time, it just kind of shuts down growth for a couple days. And we do that to make sure that plants don't get too tall. And because if they get too tall, what happens is if you have like a big storm come through, the wheat blows over, your yields go down, quality goes down. And it's really important that doesn't happen. So we'll use plant growth regulators in combination with higher fertilizer rates to get more productive wheat. So that's my project. Some other really interesting projects going on that I know of. There's one at the Elora research station near Guelph. They're using these tools called lysimeters to study carbon capture, basically in the soil under different rotations, crop rotations. There's quite a bit of research into carbon sequestration and carbon capture right now. Really, like, Guelph covers such a wide range of agricultural practices that you'll see everything from kind of soil science and how can we use nutrients more effectively, to plant breeding, how we're going to develop like the new crops that are going to feed the world more effectively under maybe drier, droughtier conditions. And then everything into like food processing and like food science itself. How do we preserve food better? There's a ton of really interesting research going on.
Nice. That sounds really cool.
Yeah.
Another question I had thought of last year when we were doing, I helped organize the food market that was going on, and we got most of our produce from either at a discount price. The market went on at the end of August, so a lot of the produce we had, that we asked for, was left over, and we were going to ask for it at a discount price to save money. But one thing that people kept on bringing up was, oh, how about all the stuff that supermarkets throw out? Why don't we just buy that from them? So it's sort of a mini question, but I wonder like what your take on it is. Like, what do you think of like food waste in general, just out of industry, out of consumerism? Like, for example, Food Basics just throwing out a ton of food, and because it doesn't look, or the business practice of only wanting to put out appealing fruit or fruit that looks, nice, rather than there's fruit that's perfectly edible, but it just gets thrown out because, it has like, stains on it or whatever. What do you think of that?
Yeah, it's definitely a huge problem, especially like in fresh produce, fruits and vegetables. Like, it's a massive issue. And there's a ton of food waste associated with it, both at like the grocery store level, but even more so in the consumer level. I forget how much it is, but I think it was something like the average person throws out 40% of the food they end up buying, or something like that. I have to double check exactly what that stat is. But I think the biggest thing to actually change that, though, is you need to change the consumer perception. Because the reason that food is thrown out or doesn't make it into grocery stores really is because people aren't buying it. And so, like, you just need to we need to like make message out to people that it's okay to buy like blemished fruit, or like not the perfectly shaped cucumber or something like that. So that's like the one big side of it. On the other side too is like, what do you do with all that grocery store produce that just goes bad, or is thrown out? Like, it's still edible, but it's just thrown away because its best before date is passed. And is there any way that we can more effectively use that? Because it's true, it's a huge waste. It's a ton of resources to produce that food and get it to the grocery store shelf, and then it just gets thrown out and goes into landfills.
What about on the side of like the farmer side? Because obviously they throw out some things that they don't use, of course.
Yeah.
Like, there's a percentage of their yield that just can't get sold and ends up going into the trash.
So that happens too on the farm side. The one thing that can catch some of that, though, is a lot of that like blemished fruit that'll go into processing. So that might be something that ends up in a can, or is baked into like a product or something. So that's able to catch some of that. But then, there's other things that like just end up being waste. Some farms have become pretty innovative with it. So one of the things that can be done is you could take all that waste product and put it in this basically and like big digester that kind of rots any of that wasted product and turns it into methane gas, which can then be used as an energy source. So some farms will do that, which is a really like great way to kind of recycle those nutrients and turn them into like a clean energy. The other thing too is not all wasted product like on farm or in field is necessarily a bad thing, because when you take any of that like vegetative matter and you leave it on the field, or you till it back or like plow it back into the soil, what you'll actually do is improve your soil over time, because all those all that like vegetative matter or nutrients, they'll break down into that soil organic matter and enrich your soil and enrich like essentially the habitat for like all the microorganisms that live in there, and in turn improve your yield in the future.
Okay, so one thing I was interested in, as an agriculture student, just for students who may be interested in the field, how much of it is scientific based? Like how much, or what I should rephrase, like what kind of courses are you taking that are like chemistry or biology related?
Yeah, so you start off with like a pretty substantial base in those core courses. Like our first year and a half really is all like calculus, bunch of chemistry courses, biochemistry most people have to take. There's like 3 or 4 biology courses. And then once you get through those, you start to be able to diversify and you kind of pick a stream. Like, are you more interested in plant agriculture? You'll move that way. Are you more interested in like animal agriculture? You'll move that way. There's a number of organic agriculture type courses as well, and sustainability and ecology. So you can kind of stream that way instead if you want. But yeah, it'll really range from something like, for example, I took a course on grain crop production, which really detailed like how we grow all of the grain crops that you might see in Canada. Versus like I also took organic agriculture, which covered like basically any sustainable agricultural practice in organic ag and how it works and rules and regulations around it. So there's a pretty diverse range of courses you can take.
Do you ever have any like intersection with like chemical engineering or chemists, like their departments?
There's a bit. So like there's a food chemistry course that we have to take along with anyone in the food department and a number of other departments as well. And then like, yeah, we'd cross paths with those like people even in engineering and general chemistry in those first year courses and second year courses.
Right.
The more general ones, yeah.
So I just curious, like from there, like what kind of things from the food processing industry side are companies doing to try and like solve some of these issues, like I said, with food waste and whatnot? Like we talked about the farmer side and then like the consumer side, but what about like the middleman, the producer, like corporations and stuff?
Yeah. It's kind of a tough, like a lot of the, say like agriculture companies that are providing products to farmers so they're able to go grow crops, that's not really their wheelhouse. Like they don't deal with the finished product afterward. There is like a lot of research going into how to better utilize food and minimize food waste and new technologies to do so. Like there is a genetically engineered apple that came out a few years ago that doesn't brown once it's cut. I forget what it's called, but something like that is like, you could say one example where there's innovation to be done to ensure that like food doesn't go to waste. But yeah, I can't really speak too much to that, to be honest.
Okay. I was just curious if there was any sort of like with the intersection, if you knew what was going on their side. But obviously since you're agriculture, you're on the farmer side. So
yeah, if you talk to anyone in the food science department, I'm sure they'd be able to give you some good answers.
Okay, so we only have around 5 minutes left in the meeting. So just going to go over one of these questions quickly.
Sure.
What do you think, because like our organization is all about sustainable growth and like I said, fair practices. What do you think, just naming perhaps 3 or 4, or not even a specific number, but some organizations that are advocating for even if not just fair practice, but just furthering the industry of agriculture?
Yeah. So I'd say one big one would be OMAFRA. So that's the Ontario Ministry of Food and Agriculture. So that's kind of their main role, is to act as a support for all Ontario agriculture, whether you're like the largest farm down to the smallest. Ideally, they're providing proper resources for you. And they're also drafting a lot of the legislation as well that affects agricultural practices and establishing new rules and regulations in terms of making things more environmentally safe, as well as safer for like the consumer and the producer. Each producer organization, so like whether you're talking about dairy industry or grain crops or beef, they also have their own organizations and lobbyist groups that look after kind of the interests of those organizations, and in a lot of cases they'll play an important role in ensuring that like food production is being done sustainably and in the best manner possible to serve the consumer. But really there's a lot of other like groups, smaller groups as well. Like Guelph has a number of organizations too, some student-led as well, such as we had one called Food Talk, which kind of works to bridge the gap between like producer and consumer. 4-H Ontario as well, which is, you may have heard of, they're an organization that's like really youth-led and like works with youth to try to get them more involved in what agriculture is, and then invested as well. So that'd be a few I could name off the top of my head.
Yeah. So this last question is a bit of an open-ended question. It's more like theoretical than realistic, but this is what I'd like to end off on, just to get your opinions, because you're a graduate student. So I mentioned big box stores like Food Basics or Walmart or Giant Tiger, places like that. When it comes to like food waste, and I know we talked about this earlier, what do you think the stores can do themselves? I mean, aside from just like the societal thing of just wanting to buy appealing products, what can those big box stores do to make sure less food is wasted?
Yeah. I would say off the top of my head, there's probably a few things that would be effective. One would be not turning away, say, like blemished or slightly unsightful produce and perhaps selling it like at a discounted price instead. I think potentially the profitability stands in the way of what could be more sustainable.
Of course.
So I'm sure people would, especially at a lower price, people would probably lean towards buying produce that maybe didn't look quite as nice, but it has to be a bit of an initiative by those companies to do that and maybe take a profit loss in the meantime. What I kind of mentioned earlier with bioreactors that digest unused food waste, if we did that more instead of just sending food directly to landfill, that would be an effective way of potentially using, at least getting some use out of that waste. If it really can't be used for human consumption, at least we can turn it into like a clean, renewable energy that we can use.
Mm-hmm.
That would be great. And also just educating consumers. Like there's a big gap between what consumers expect and think of what happens in ag versus what actually happens and what they get at the store. So if we could bridge that gap and they could understand a bit better, that would probably be really helpful too.
And hopefully the whole point of this podcast, people will watch it and understand, especially from a perspective like yourself, like what these issues actually mean. I like what you said about pesticides, because the conception about pesticides, at least from what I hear, being someone who's not in ag and listening to other people who aren't in ag, they think, oh, pesticides are bad, they're garbage chemicals and they're polluting the planet, and they're terrible. But like you said, it's a necessary means to business, necessary means to production. So I like how you mentioned that. That's the whole point of this interview, ultimately, is just for educational. purposes.
Yeah.
People need to learn more. So thank you a lot for your time, Kurtis. It was good talking to you. You're very knowledgeable. And I hope everything goes well with your studies. And so are you starting, like it's the summer right now, but when do you return to university?
Yeah, thanks, Noah. It's like great to talk to you. Always happy to talk about ag. So for me, the summer has been pretty busy because this is when all of my field research happens. So that just finished up. We just harvested winter wheat a couple weeks ago. And so now I'm kind of digging through a mountain of data that I collected over the last couple months.
Nice.
And we'll be analyzing that and then preparing to defend and hopefully graduate in the winter.
Thanks for listening to this episode of What Do You Bring to the Table? See you again soon.